I'm here with author Andy Andrews talking about his new book, How Do You Kill 11 Million People? And it's an appropriate day because today in 1945, Great Britain and the U.S. celebrated Victory in Europe Day.
Wow.
So, of all days for you to come in, this is a terrific day to talk about this book with the subtitle, Why the Truth Matters More Than You Think. But first I have to ask, this title, How Do You Kill 11 Million People? Do they search you security-wise a lot more? I mean, when you're writing the manuscript, do people kind of back up?
Let me tell you something. I literally, when I was writing the manuscript to this, I was writing it by hand, and I had papers in my carry-on bag, and never occurred to me, but a TSA lady was going through it, and she picked it up, and there it is in my handwriting. How do you kill 11 million people? And she looked up at me, and I knew immediately, and I said, I'm an author. I'm not a very good one, but I'm an author. I'm writing a book. It has been amazing. And so they do, sometimes they see that book in my bag and they kind of laugh.
I bet. Well, it's a big departure from your previous work. And you're certainly not saying that the U.S. is exactly comparable to Germany in World War II, but you are saying there are these key lessons that we can learn from history, and the book is thought-provoking. Tell me more about that.
Well, the title refers to something, and as you know, Skip, I read a lot of history and I read odd history. And so one of the things that always bothered me about the Holocaust, beyond the obvious, was how did they kill 11 million people? Not how did they do it physically, what methods they used, not how crazy do you have to be to do something like that, but how do you get 11 million people to allow themselves to be killed? Because every time you look at a documentary or read about the people loading themselves onto trains, there's relatively few Nazi guards. And you're always thinking, why don't they just rush them? Why don't they fight? Why don't they run? They couldn't possibly kill them all. But the answer, when I found the answer, it stunned me. Because I knew it was a method still being used by some elected leaders today to achieve various goals. How do you kill 11 million people? You lie to them. And these people were literally loading themselves and their families onto these trains because they had been told they were being moved out of the way of the Russian front for safety. They were going to a place where there were factory jobs, housing for all of them, schools and teachers waiting for their children, and they literally were lied to. And so my question that I asked years ago was, can I write something that doesn't say Republican, doesn't say Democrat, doesn't say liberal or conservative, and yet every single person who reads it would agree with it? And of course, now you can see why it took me 5 years to figure out the answer to that question, because I wasn't sure there was anything.
Or TSA had you locked up.
Exactly. But I wasn't sure there was anything everybody agreed with. But I knew that to bring our country together, if at some point we are to be together and not continue to get meaner and meaner, at some point we have to agree on something. And the essence of leadership is agreement, not disagreement. Republicans and Democrats have been yelling at each other since God was a boy. And I don't know that anybody has changed anybody's mind. But because of that argument, there are literally millions and millions of people who've just kind of gotten out of the process because they're so disgusted with both sides, I suppose. But the one thing everybody agrees with is this. I mean, you could walk outside today. I don't care how old they are. I don't care what income bracket, what color. You ask anybody you run into, is it okay for politicians to lie to us, or should they tell us the truth? Every person you talk to will say, oh, they should tell us the truth.
And yet so often we hear that they don't. And so many people are disaffected. How do we get, what's the prescription, for this? We're in this state, the tension between the parties is high. We're in an election year. How do we compromise and negotiation, now bad words, right? Now it's the opposite. How do we get people to, citizens to get involved and compromise?
I always believe that more knowledge is better than secrets. And so one of the ways that we get people involved is to help them understand patterns of history. Now, we only chose the 11 million. That was just one number among many we could have chosen in the past 100 years in our world. But over and over and over again, you see where governments dissolve into killing their own people, into controlling their own people. It always starts with a pattern of lies. So to understand that that is the key ingredient, and to understand that, when you look at Nazi Germany, people say, when the Nazis took over, well, the Nazis didn't take over. They were elected. This was a democracy, right? I mean, Germany, this was an educated population with easy access and ready access to print media and radio broadcast, and they elected them. Now, granted, in a country of 80 million people, the Nazi Party only had 8.5 million members at the height of their power. So this is part of the understanding I want people to have to get them to move, and that is that literally 10% of this country dragged these people into this nightmare, while 90% sat around, didn't vote, and said, well, that can't happen here, or, what can one person do? And literally, by the time they got the Jews, they started putting the tags on everybody else. See, this is something people don't remember. That of that 11 million people, 5 million were not even Jewish. After the yellow triangles, the yellow stars went on the Jews, they started issuing purple stars for Catholic priests, for Christians that ran afoul of the government. Blue stars were for undocumented people. If you were stopped on the street and you couldn't give documentation of an address, then you were put into the camps and given a blue star, blue triangle. The brown stars were given to gypsies and people of Italian descent. Red stars were given to Democrats, Freemasons. If you were a member of a trade union, you got a red star. You got a green star if you were just a common thief or murderer. And because the common thieves and murderers were not suspect politically, they were put in charge of the other people in the camps. And so this was an amazing thing to understand for us today, that apathy, sitting back, is not an option. And so here, I know this is a long answer to a great question, but here is what I want people to understand. In the past 25 years, there's not been a single presidential election that has been won by more than 10 million votes. They've all been that close. And yet, in the past 25 years, there's not been a single presidential election in which fewer than 100 million people of voting age did not vote. Now, that 100 million people, right now, there's two reasons they don't vote. One is they think their vote doesn't matter. But I want to remind them that if 10% of Germany can drag them into the darkness, certainly 10% of us can drag our country into the light. And so your vote does matter. We don't need all 100 million people to vote. We just need 10 million to totally take an election. And so the second reason people don't vote is they look at who's running and they think, I don't like any of them. That guy smokes, that guy goes to a weird church, that guy's been married too many times, that guy's, for whatever reason, say, I don't like any of them. But what I want people to understand is that I don't talk to anybody today who doesn't believe that America is not at a tipping point. And if you believe that we're a ship headed for an iceberg, then maybe we don't have the perfect captain to jump in there and turn this thing totally around right now. Maybe that person comes in 4 years or 8 years. But right now, you have to choose the big things. What are the big things? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And how do they feel about that? And you're voting right now, not in an election. You are voting on a direction. It's not about the election, it's about the direction. And that's what we have to do to get people to vote, to understand that we're choosing the direction that our country moves in.
It's awesome. Well, speak to the next generation, even your grandchildren, watching this way in the future. What do you say to them in terms of how do you know? I mean, every leader will tell you, I'm telling you the truth, this is that. How do you discern good leadership and the truth? And then how do you, second question is, how do you become a person that is a leader?
Right. Boy, that's a great question. And my first thought that I had when you said, talk to your children and grandchildren, we've talked in those terms for years. The country we leave our children, the country we leave our grandchildren. But I think it's a little more serious than that now. I think a lot of us are looking around going, I am concerned for my children and grandchildren, but this is happening right now. This is happening to me. And so we do need to get moving in that direction. And I really believe, when you say, how do you discern? The German people have at least an excuse that when Hitler would go around and give speeches, he would say one thing to this group and another thing to this group. He would talk to agricultural people about one thing, and then he'd talk to the captains of industry about crushing the trade unions and destroying communism. Then he would go to the trade unions and talk to them about, about not letting these wealthy people have all this money and having the money equally divided. But they at least had the excuse that they didn't have the internet. Okay? So right now, today, you can see every single thing these guys say. And so when a person goes to one group and says this, and then goes to another group, and totally 180 degrees different says the other thing, we have easy access to that. You can look at it. Okay? And then in terms of being a leader, leadership is a lot simpler than most people think. We're all leaders. So many people think, well, I'm not a leader. Oh, yes, you are. If you've got kids, you're a leader. If you've got friends you care about, you're a leader, because you're leading them to something or you're leading them to nothing. But we're leading with our opinions, with our thoughts, and with our words. And so what I want people to understand is you don't have to get out there and lead 1,000 people or even 50. You can lead 5 and 6. If you understand the butterfly effect, you understand that every move you make is continued on. And that's frankly why I wrote this cheap little book. Because you can read the whole book in 15 or 20 minutes, and the book's cheap enough that people can buy several copies to give away. We're so excited. People are having reading parties. And they're inviting 5 and 6 people over to their house for coffee, and they're reading the book to them aloud. Or they're passing the book around. You read 3 pages, she reads 3 pages. And after they read the book, they talk about it. Everybody gets the book, and you go out, and next week you have coffee at your house.
It is a great discussion book, and I can see your other book, The Butterfly Effect. You can see how it would have an impact way down the road on a number of decisions and a number of actions. And true leadership and taking that action yourself. You can just see that as a theme that you're saying. Wake up and take action, do something. And so thank you for this and for sharing it. It's a profound book, thought-provoking for sure, and it's one that lingers with you. And then you think about it the next day, and each time you have a different emotion or a different thought. You can see that. I could definitely see it being a great discussion book. So thanks so much for talking about it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.